So I think a good place to start is just think about scheduling time, set time aside for your admin stuff, all the thing, building your campaigns, building your emails, set time aside for being creative, but be flexible with yourself, like think about how you're feeling. If you're feeling overwhelmed and you're feeling stressed, go take a walk, go do something else that fuels your creativity.
You are now listening to the Creative Juice podcast brought to you by Indepreneur.io.
What's up, Indies? Welcome back to the Creative Juice podcast. I'm your host, Jack McCarthy, and this is episode 236. And I'm really excited today to be bringing this topic to you guys. With me, as always, is my co-host, Mr. Ed Isola. And we have a very special guest with us today to talk about, I think, a topic that plagues a lot of artists who are really in the thick of getting busy in their business. They're busy with things like booking shows and planning their releases and actually handling the marketing of their music, that it can often get really, really hard to actually stay creative. So to talk about this topic and discuss strategies and tools and processes that you can put into place in your music career to help keep you on a creative path while you're busy doing all the other stuff is none other than the Director of Operations here at Indepreneur, Jonah McLean, aka Alien Funk Producer Dukes. Jonah, welcome to the show, my friend.
Thank you very much, Jack. I'm stoked to be back on the podcast. It's been a minute.
Yeah, for sure. I think the last time that you were on the show, we were talking about productivity strategies and Scrum and how to organize your weeks as an artist. And this is a little bit of a turn in a different direction. Before we actually started rolling the show, Ed brought up a really insightful point to say, like, yeah, I've been feeling, well, Ed, you tell him. How are you feeling right now creatively, sir?
You know what? I will tell them. Yeah, we were talking about the fact that like Jack said, it's very easy to kind of get caught up in like, I need to build this funnel and write this ad copy and let me see if I can, answer these emails and all these different things, that sometimes it feels like the creativity to actually write and record music, for me specifically, like where I'm at is right now, writing wise, we're working on our third album. And I realized today, right before we recorded, I was like, man, it feels like I haven't had time to, or rather, I don't know how to put myself in the headspace right now of how to create. Because for me, historically, it's always been like, I'm really good at creating when I have a lot of low pressure time to just kind of like hang out and write and like, oh, if it works, it works. If it doesn't, I'll try again tomorrow. And lately I've kind of been in this place where I have time windows, which is probably something a lot of people can relate to, where I'm like, hey, I've got 1 to 3 free to work on music. And then subconsciously, I'm like, I better get something done here or else I'm going to be behind. And then that whole thing kind of starts. So just feeling a little bit like, not stressed out, but just more like, man, I wish I could streamline how I'm going to create so I can actually find time to do it in a way that works for me and gets results or songs done, if that makes sense.
And I think a lot of artists feel that way. Really similarly, a lot of times when I'm talking about this with people who are interested in working with us at IndieX, they say to me like, yeah, I've been busy doing all the marketing and writing copy and building sales offers and trying to get people onto my list and running our ads. I've been so busy doing that, which is great, that I don't have time to actually focus on making the art. And I know that that's a big fear that a lot of creatives have, is that like in applying the creativity somewhere else, you lose the muse for actually making the music.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like I agree with that. And there's probably a lot of artists who upfront say, I don't want to do marketing because I won't be able to make music. But I think who we're kind of getting after today is artists that have started learning how to market themselves and are already marketing themselves successfully, that maybe the marketing is excelling, but the music is kind of taking the back seat. And I've always found for myself that I get in these cyclical patterns of like, here's the album launch, here's what I'm kind of focusing on in terms of marketing. And then that stops. And then historically it's like a down period of, well, now I can write. But where we're at right now is, well, things are still going on the marketing front and we can't really afford to stop there, but we also can't afford to not have new music coming. So it's this really interesting question mark of like, how do you find the time to create and market, and how do you differentiate those two things in your mind so that when you're doing each of them, you're doing each of them to their fullest capacity, I guess is how I think about it.
Yeah, it's funny too, Ed, because, you know, I can only imagine for you guys, you know, because for me with Dukes, you know, like I'm still pretty new in the marketing game, right? Like pretty much since I started at Indepreneur a couple years ago, and even more so like recently in the last year, really digging in on that stuff. And it's really been a new challenge for me because, kind of like you said, Ed, you know, like I feel like I've always had time and energy and the desire to create. You know, what I didn't have necessarily was the desire to market and you know, learn these different strategies, and it takes a lot of work. And so, you know, I've spent a lot of time in the last year or two trying to get that stuff up to speed, and then, you know, trying to balance it where it's like, how do I still make time for the thing that I love most, which is, you know, right, like making the music. That's why we all do this. So it's great. It's great to see it, you know, from, I think for people listening, you know, a lot of different perspectives here, you know, even with you as well, Jack, where, you know, as you mentioned before we got on the call, you know, we've been super busy with Indepreneur, and that makes it hard for you. You know, you just are starting to ramp back up. You just released, you know, your first single, and it's like, man, you know, work is crazy. Life is crazy. Like, how do I make time to actually do this? So it's cool. I feel like we kind of have like three case studies here in terms of, you know, like how we could approach this topic. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's interesting kind of to look at this from sort of all angles. You know, like you said, Jonah, I'm in a place where I just put a single out, and now I'm really trying to stay on top of continuing to create, to have music to follow that up with. You're in a place where you've been working really diligently on the infrastructure, the marketing infrastructure and the business systems for Dukes, and trying to stay creative alongside that, and keep those things kind of in balance with each other. And Ed, you're sounding just overwhelmed all across the board with the 502s, between the touring that you guys are doing and working on a new record and being locked in on all the promotions that we're running together and the marketing that we're doing and staying on top of that. So yeah, they kind of are like sort of three different entry points into this challenge of staying creative. I'm curious, Jonah, from your perspective as someone who manages a lot of projects and has been really, really structured with what you do with Dukes. I know you do sprint planning weekly for your music project, and we've talked about that before. And I'll make sure we'll link in the show notes to the episode that we did about productivity in your music business that we did right around this time last year. But I'm curious how you've applied those same systems into the creative portions, and not necessarily just the, you know, applying the creativity to your marketing, but actually making music and producing music.
Yeah, it's, you know, it's funny, Jack, like when you mentioned this to me, you know, as a topic that we could talk about, I was really excited, and I started kind of thinking about, you know, what are some notes and like some bullet points that we can make, because yeah, I think as you said, having a background in project management has helped me in a lot of ways with music, you know, especially being, you know, for all intents and purposes, a solo artist, right? Like I collaborate with different people, but for the most part, you know, I'm the one that's doing the driving here for the Dukes project. And so, you know, one of the first things I thought about, and I think, you know, it's kind of a two-part, but I think the first part, you know, is going to make sense to a lot of people, which is scheduling time. But I think what's really important with this is, you know, being flexible with yourself when you schedule time, because I think that being creative and creating music, creating art is not logging in to set up a workflow and drip, right? It's not, it is, that's creative too, but it's much more technical. It's something that has a start, it has an end, you know, you build your campaign, you build your workflow, and you did it, you're done. Creating, you know, can be so much more nebulous and is so impacted by how we feel and what's going on in life, right? Like it's hard to make music if you're feeling scattered or there's a lot going on. And so one thing I really adopted, especially over the last year or so, as I've ramped up with improving my marketing knowledge, is I basically have creative blocks that are on my calendar. I think I have currently two days a week. They're usually about 4-hour blocks that I try and set aside as like, okay, you know, these are times that I'm going to try and go into the studio and use it as an opportunity to just be creative, just do what I love to do, sit at my keyboards, you know, make beats, have fun. But one thing I really try and do when I'm doing that is if I'm not feeling up to it, I don't force it. I think that if you're scheduling time on your calendar to create and you're setting that expectation, and then you go in to actually work on stuff and you don't feel good and you don't deliver anything, that can actually make you feel worse, right? It's like you had this expectation of like, yeah, I'm going to go in and work on some music today, but then you actually get to it and it's not what you wanted it to be. So I think a good place to start is just think about scheduling time, set time aside for your admin stuff, all the thing, building your campaigns, building your emails, set time aside for being creative, but be flexible with yourself, like think about how you're feeling. If you're feeling overwhelmed and you're feeling stressed, go take a walk, go do something else that fuels your creativity. You don't feel like you have to just use that time like, okay, I'm going to write a song in 4 hours today, because it doesn't always work that way. And I think for me personally, by being more flexible with my schedule and my energy, that's been really great for me, because I've delivered more in the time that I've set aside. And if I'm not feeling it, hey, it's okay. Like, I'm not going to beat myself up for that. You know what I mean?
So here's a question for you on that, kind of as a follow-up. Like, you talked about setting aside time, like blocking time for marketing, blocking time for admin, blocking time for creative work, but being flexible with yourself in that creative work block. Do you hold yourself to the standard of like, if I'm not feeling like I can write a song, or I can produce out a track right now, or I can't cut vocals this moment, or whatever it might be, do you then use that time for like, do you have like your back pocket list of things? It's like, I need a creative recharge, so I'm going to go for a walk, or I'm going to go for a run. And then do you fit it into that time? Like, I'm really curious, because like I definitely could learn something from that. Because when I find myself blocked in my blocks, so to speak, like kind of creatively clogged up, I definitely am prone to being like oh, now I'm just depressed. Like I can't get anything done, which tends to just make me sadder.
Yeah, exactly. Right. It's like, it's really easy for us to beat ourselves up, because again, right, like we walk into it with that expectation. And so, yeah, to answer your question, I do, like one thing I've really learned, and I think that we often take for granted, is for the majority of us, I can't say it's for everyone, but I think for a lot of people, we need that time as artists to recharge, and so like you said, going for a walk, I know you love that too, Jack. You and I always talk on the phone late at night, and you're out on walks and stuff. And I live here in the Pacific Northwest in Portland. There's so much beautiful stuff around here. And I find for me, like a great recharge is getting out into nature and going for a walk, going with Sarah, my wife, and going for a hike. I do try and use that time where even if I can't be in the studio and it's not feeling great, I can still use it for creativity, which is to kind of refuel and recharge myself. At the beginning of the year, I was reading The Artist's Way, which is, a really popular book, kind of that touches on a lot of this, clearing blockers in your creativity and things like that. And Julia Cameron, I believe, is the artist, if I'm not messing up the name. But one of the things she recommends is artist dates. And it's basically time that you set aside in your schedule that's just for you as an artist, like you're nurturing your creativity and you're giving yourself that space and that time and energy to just kind of play with your creative self. And whatever that looks like for you and for the people listening, again, for me, it's going for walks, it's going for hikes. I love going to record stores and kind of just checking out different stuff like that. There's so many things that you can do that will make you feel more creative when you come back to your creativity, that aren't just sit down and create, right? Like there's a lot of things that you can do that encompass that. So yeah, Jack, I think like respecting that time, even if it means, hey, like I'm not in the studio today, but that's all right. I'm still being creative. I'm still taking creative time. I think that that's really powerful and an important thing to look at,
Yeah, for sure. I'd like to kind of experiment here with a little exercise, like in that vein of things. Like, what do you guys think would be your top 3 kind of like back pocket, like creative energizers? I think I have mine, so I'm happy to start. I mean, one is definitely going for walks. 2 is reading. Interestingly enough, like I historically throughout all of my life have found myself to be the most creative musically when I'm also fueling my brain with reading. And specifically, like I read a lot of like business literature now and marketing stuff. I'm talking more about like reading fiction and stuff like that. Like creative works like that really help to like set me off stories. And also, interestingly enough, like looking at pictures, and not necessarily like illustrations, like picture books, but like looking at photography is definitely helpful. Viewing things in nature, I guess, is another piece of this. But in general, like having visuals, I'm very visual when it comes to like fueling myself. So those are probably my big three.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's really interesting because really quick on something Jonah said was like the whole don't force it thing. I feel like that is something I've always thought as well, but it's not something you hear people say a lot of times. It's kind of like, that's part of the job. You have to sit down in those 2 hours and try to write a song. And that, I don't know if that's like very much like Nashville songwriter type of mentality and that kind of stuff. But I agree with you on that front. Like, I think it's hurtful to try to force it. What's really interesting when it comes to like, how do I recharge creatively? For me, I don't know like exactly how to explain it, but when it comes to creating, I need like time before and after to know I'm going into this like, afternoon or day essentially to be like, the only thing I have to do today is just hang out and like whatever happens musically happens. So like one thing I'll do is scheduling wise, I'll really front load my week a lot to where maybe I have Thursday afternoon open or Friday afternoon or all day Saturday. So I have like huge blocks of time. Makes parts of the other week kind of more complicated, but that's just kind of how I approach it scheduling wise. But I mean, for me, like clearing my mind, I work out every morning. So that's great. Funny enough, like Jack said, reading yesterday, I was like, I don't even know what this song is going to be about. So I kind of just started going through and essentially Googling like, what's a synonym for, like, well, maybe this song's about nostalgia. So like, what are quotes about nostalgia or what are synonyms, and kind of using reading and Googling and movies as well. I like watching movies, just kind of like trying to go after and absorb things. That's like, I feel like I'm trying to say this or trying to feel this way. Like, let me go experience a movie or a song or a book or an article that somebody has already written about this, and maybe it'll give me a new perspective. So kind of like stepping away from the actual creative process and more so just like Jack said, immersing myself in that idea so that I just have time to kind of live with it.
I love that. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's kind of my main thing when it comes to like, how do I recharge? And then the third one is just, I love just having, by virtue of being in a band, just having like some of the guys come over and same thing. We just jam and we just hang out, and it's like, maybe we come up with a song, maybe we don't, but like, that's not the goal today. The goal today is like to just exist, play together, and, maybe have a sip of whiskey or something. Just like you said, giving myself that space where it's not so pressure oriented, because like you said, Jonah, everything, I feel like I have 1,000 things going on in my life, and 99% of them are very technical, and or like, I show up at this point, I do this thing, I build this workflow, I go to this dinner, like whatever it is, it has a very clear start and stop time. So it's very easy to do a lot, but you can't have that creatively. And so like making sure that I'm giving myself that time where it's like, man, maybe I just wasted 4 hours, but who cares,
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And it makes me, I'll share kind of what I think my activities are. I guess I kind of already touched on them, but that you raise a good point, Ed. And there's an illustrator that I follow. Their name is Yumi Sajikawa, and I follow them on Instagram. They have really great content that talks about just kind of, going about being a creative, how to structure that, how to be easy on yourself. One thing that they talk about, I took a workshop that they did, and a really cool concept. And I think part of the reason, Jack mentioned, getting outside and being in nature, right? Like, I think embracing an idea that everything we do can be creative. And Yumi talks a lot about how creative nature is, right? So if you think about a plant growing, the plant is growing. This is an evolving organism, but it's never in a rush. It's never doing anything than other than what it is. And in and of itself, that is a creative act. And so, getting out in nature, I think, is such a great way to fuel that. But even things like that we do around the house, like if I'm cooking a meal, like that can be creative, like that can be fun. And if I approach it with the energy of, hey, this is fun, this is creativity, we can really take a lot out of that. And so I think it's important that, like you're saying, Ed, it's really hard, like, how do I view my workout as being creative, or, these different things. But if we can inject a little bit of that into what we do throughout the day and throughout our lives, like there's a lot more that's creative that goes on than we think. And so for me, I kind of touched on it earlier, but getting out in nature, just like you said, Jack, for me, I shoot photography. It's kind of a hobby, not really something I'm super interested in pursuing professionally, but I love to do it. And I also love being outside. So for me, those really go hand in hand. And, I find that when I'm blocked creatively, or I'm just feeling overwhelmed or stressed, again, we'll go out to the coast, or we're going to the forest and go on a hike, and I'll bring my camera, and it's so energizing. I think it's such a good and productive use of my creative energy that might have been wasted if I just sat there trying to be like, all right, let me finish this song. Let me finish this video, just like hammering away. I get more out of it, and we can still approach those things as creative, like they're refilling that creative battery. So, trying to approach the things in day-to-day life, these things that we're talking about that for each of us are refilling that creative well, let them be that, like don't feel like you can't get something out of that for your creativity. And I think an important thing to note is the idea of even just 1% a day. Like I've really been trying to focus on this recently with my music and with my creative endeavors with my music, is like, hey, like Ed, like you're saying, if I go into the studio, maybe I'm not going to write the whole song. Sometimes that happens. You sit down and it just comes out and it's like, there it is. There's my song. But other times you might do like you're saying, Ed, like maybe you're researching, all right, what is this song going to be about? And maybe you'll only get 2 lyrics or 2 words, but that you did it, you know what I mean? Like you created, and it's like, it doesn't have to be, you finish the project, it's all done. It's like, hey, like you got 2 words, you're further along finishing the creative act than you were when you started. And, I think that's an important thing to really, really keep your eyes on as you're going about this stuff,
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like kind of circling back to what I was saying before we jumped on, I was sitting here and I was a little frustrated, like, man, I don't really know what the song's about, or, I don't have any lyrics, and then worked on it for an hour. And at the end of it, I was like, oh, well, I got the first verse now, and I'm pretty happy with that. And then my first thought was like, that's not very much. It's 10 songs, right? And you have 1 verse. And then I was like, well, it's more than I had an hour ago, so I'm making progress. And I find too, like probably a lot of people do, it comes in waves, and then in 1 second you're like, man, I can't come up with anything. And then a week from now, I'll talk to you guys and be like, yeah, I finished 6 of the songs, And so like for me, I think what we're all kind of touching on is giving yourself the ability to get out there and not have so much pressure around creating. Like it's something that you're supposed to enjoy. What I found is I haven't necessarily been creative as it comes to songwriting or anything like that, or writing lyrics for a while, probably like a year plus. And so to me, I was getting frustrated. And before I was thinking about it today, I was like, well, I haven't really done this thing in a year, and I feel like I need to just start showing up and allowing myself to be creative. And I almost feel like that kind of unlocks the door into actual creativity. It's like you got to kind of start by saying like, all right, I'm going to give myself 2 hours a day, every day this week, whether it's morning, night, whenever. And I'm just going to try. I'm going to read about stuff. I'm going to write stuff. I'm going to like kind of recharge myself. And then to me, I'm going to guess that in 2 or 3 weeks, like a lot of the lyrics will be done, because I've been intentional about trying to like be creative, or at least set myself up to be creative.
That's a really good point, and I totally agree. Like, especially if you're coming from a place where you're creatively blocked. Like if you have writer's block, like I definitely was dealing with a long stretch of writer's block, and I've talked about this on the show before when it came to my own songwriting, and allowing yourself the time to get the lead out, so to speak, and just like play and enjoy and be creative without like a, you know, an agenda behind it. I think you're totally right, Ed. Like, and that might take 2 weeks, that might take 2 months, but I do think that it's necessary, especially when you're in a place of being like totally blocked. It's been pretty critical for me to just like sit down and kind of reconnect with that, the 11-year-old me that would come home from school and like shut his bedroom door and turn his guitar amp up all the way and just play for hours, you know? That's been really important to allow myself to get back to that and then, you know, tumble somersault into making songs from that.
Yeah, I think that's a good point too, you know, Jack. Like, you know, I think an important piece, you know, really of all of this is like, I've found that as I've gone through kind of my creative journey, you know, the times that I love the most when I'm creating music is when I'm in that state of flow and it's like ideas are just coming and I can like finish a song or a track or whatever it is. And you know, it's like I can't get it down fast enough, you know, it's like, it's just there and I'm getting it out. But
the best moments,
yeah. But it's like, that doesn't always happen. And I think, I mean, at least personally for me, you know, as I've gotten older and I have, you know, just more responsibility or, you know, family stuff, like whatever's going on, work, you know, those things are harder. And I think it's important that when you have those moments, I would argue, I'm curious what you guys think about this, but I would argue that when those happen, I kind of try and like, forget the schedule, forget anything that's going on. Like, I need to sit down and work on this, you know? So I think that's an important point to make is like, you know, when you do feel like that kid at play, you're just having fun. It's like, yeah, get in the sandbox and like do it, you know, because it's not every day that you have that, but the more that you're making it a part of your regular routine. And again, like doing these things we're talking about, like, you know, filling up your battery, I think it happens more, but I think it's important, you know, to note that when you feel that way, like grab it, you know, if you could sit down with a pen, if you're a songwriter or at your instrument, do it, you know, because still to this day, you know, that's some of my favorite time creating is when I feel that way, you know, it truly is like the best, like you said, Jack, you know.
Dude, I had a moment a couple weeks ago, just like this. Actually, I had to get up really early one day to go to the doctor and I had to get some blood work done. So I was driving and I got out of the shower and I got in the car and like a hook came into my head. And I was like, oh, that's a cool line. Like that sounds like a hook. Mind you, my doctor's office is 5 minutes from a 5-minute drive from my house. It's very close. By the time that I had gotten in my car and gotten to the parking garage, I had a verse and a chorus for this song. And I was like, shaking with excitement because I was just in one of those moments where I was like, oh man, like this is a song, like this is happening very fast. I'm in the waiting room now, sitting, tapping my foot and kind of like humming this along to myself, making little voice notes here and there, you know, waiting for my name to be called. And then by the time I get back to my apartment, you know, 15 minutes later, I'm like, grab the guitar, like nothing else matters. Anything else that was like pressing for the day, kind of like, it was like, it can wait a half an hour, you know? It can wait a half an hour for me to tap into this moment. So I totally agree with you. Like sometimes you have to allow yourself to push off the other things when the moment strikes.
Yeah, I think it's super important. And you know, again, right? Like ideally, sure, yeah, like that happens all the time. Every time you schedule in your calendar, I'm going to create today, you know, you feel that way. But, you know, again, I think through doing all these other things and you know, I have you guys heard of the War of Art?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, right. So, you know, he talks a lot about that. Stephen Pressfield. Again, I think I've tried to remember these author names, but yeah, you know, like showing up every day, right? But again, as we've touched on, it's like showing up every day can mean a lot of different things. It doesn't just mean like you're doing, you know, you're writing 6 songs in a week, like Ed's saying, or whatever. And you're always going to have those moments, as he says in the book, where the muse, you know, is in your ear and you're in that state of flow and it's just coming out. Those will happen more, you know, the more that you're regular and routine, you know, and respectful of your time in creating. Like, I just think that, yeah, that's just how that works.
I have another thought kind of as a piggyback, but also maybe a step into another direction on this. That's like how to organize the other things that you're doing so that they don't block you from being creative when it comes to actually writing or producing or whatever it might be, whatever your art is. Because I think a lot of this also applies to people who aren't musicians. Like this could apply to filmmakers or podcasters or artists, visual artists, graphic artists, kind of you name it. Something I think that's helpful to keep in mind here, and I'm kind of drawing on my own experience recently, was when I was working on my single that I just released a couple weeks ago, I outlined in my head pretty much after the song was, it was like 80% of the way done or 90% of the way done. And I was trying to get it over the finish line. And that was where like the creepy crawlies started coming into my brain and being like, now you need to market it. You need to come up with the next thing to do. And it was like the paralysis of like, oh my God, all the things that I know I'm constantly telling other artists to focus on are now creeping into my head and stopping me from finishing the actual work. I think what's really helpful is when you're in creative mode, if if you can itemize out, I'll call them non-creative things, but like you said, Jonah, like really everything can be creative. And like I've stressed plenty of times on the show that like you should be applying your creativity to your marketing. But for the purpose of like separating them into different boxes for a second, if you can itemize out, when I release this song, I know I'm going to need like a video. I know I'm going to need album art. I know I might need like a few vertical clips or whatever. If you just have those written down, and like, okay, when I get there, that's what I'm going to tackle. It takes away a lot of the stress and the strain of like, I need to plan what to do next. Just give yourself a rough framework or a to-do list of like, okay, I know that I'm going to need to accomplish these things. So for now, I'm going to put them off to the side and finish creating. I think that can be really helpful.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's something that I kind of struggle with too. It's just like, as soon as you have a good chorus, it's like, man, this would be great for TikTok or whatever. And so outlining that and not writing music, I think it's okay to incorporate in some degrees, like, oh, this would be good for a live show or for this. Like, I definitely do that, but not writing or creating for some other purpose other than like, this is the thing that is speaking to me and feeling right now. I think you're smart to say like, write it down. Same thing where like, if you're thinking of 20,000 things you got to do tomorrow, you should write them down. I think this is kind of a very similar idea where it's almost like those things are getting in the way of creativity, where you don't want to be thinking ahead in that instance until the song's done, or at least written. Something I think that's important, a lot of people would probably agree with, is like, it all starts at a good song. So you have to have a good song together before you can market it. And that's what I think also makes marketing the most effective, is when you have a really good song. So kind of treating that as a priority of like, I got to make this thing great, and then I can move on to my next to-do list. I think that's a really smart point. Yeah,
I agree, Ed. And I think a lot of what we've talked about, Jack, the last time I was on the podcast and we talked about, Scrum and project management and these kinds of things, I think that's where a lot of that stuff comes in really handy, because if you're, and however you do it, however you're, let's just call it planning your work, right? Like if people don't use Scrum or what have you, it's like just mapping out, okay, like what am I doing this week, or what am I doing in the next couple months? Like what's the game plan? Like you said, Jack, it takes some of that mind clutter out of the way, to where, let's say you start the song, like you were saying, Jack, you've got the verse and the chorus, and then, okay, how am I going to market this? What am I going to do? There's nothing wrong with taking that time to put that stuff down on paper. For me, it might look like putting it in Asana, or for someone that's putting it in a Google Doc or what have you, because I do think that helps you clear your mind of having to worry about that portion of it. And like Ed's saying, just really focus on the part of like, hey, let's just like make this art the best that I can. Let me be present in creating. I already am worried about that stuff. It's in my Asana, or it's in my Google Doc or my spreadsheet, or whatever, however you manage your work. That'll help you kind of come back and focus on what you're trying to do, which is make art, be creative, have fun. So, I think for those that haven't checked out that episode, or some of the stuff we have in the community around project management and Scrum, those are great resources to check out, because a lot of that stuff can really help you kind of compartmentalize a little bit more, so that okay, yeah, like I know I'm creating right now. Let me be present in that. I already worried about the other stuff, you know, like I've already done it. It's good. You know?
I totally agree. It's like, I think as creatives, there are a lot of creatives, and I won't say all because it's definitely not all, but I think creatives oftentimes have the tendency of falling into the category of being like someone who has things as an organized mess, right? Like they know where everything is, but it's kind of messy, and it spills over into a lot of places in their life, whether it be their actual creation of their art, to the marketing of that art and their business, sometimes their home life, or, you know, their living situation. You know, they have a messy room or whatever, and there's no judgment on any of that. However, I think you raise a really good point in that, like, if you keep your busy work or the stuff, you know, the stuff that goes into the non-creative bucket for you, maybe more organized, or you at least try to streamline it or put it into, you know, a system or something that you can track, it allows you to take the stress off of it and just put it away for a little bit, because you know it's there waiting for you and you're not going to forget about it.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think it's different for everyone, right? Like, you know, you mentioned like the busy work or you know, perhaps just like the stuff that doesn't feel as creative. And, you know, if you look at what we do at Indepreneur and what we teach, you know, marketing is extremely creative, you know, copy is extremely creative, you know, videos, all these things. But I think naturally, like, different people are probably more comfortable feeling creative in different things than others. You know, for me, I love video. I love making videos. I've almost always done all of my own Dukes videos. And like, sometimes I like it almost as much as making the music. I don't like building ad campaigns, you know, but like for you, Jack, you know, like that's something you do all the time and you're great at it. And it's like, maybe, you know, you feel creative in that. So, you know, it's like different things for different people will feel, you know, it'll be easier to sink that creative energy into those things. And, you know, as we say, having it mapped out and being aware of it, you know, will just help it feel less like, oh man, like this is the busy work that I don't want to do. It's like, no, you know, it's an important part of the process, and, you know, it's there for you when you're ready to pick it up and cruise on it, you know?
So true. Yeah, that's so true. Well, yeah, I think we covered some really, hopefully actionable stuff for anyone who might be feeling roadblocked or stuck in a writer's block rut. Jonah, do you have any kind of last piece words of wisdom from a project management or just an organizational perspective that people could take home with them, and, you know, might be as simple as like put together a to-do list, or it might be as complex as, you know, plan out your whole stack inside of Asana, but something that someone could do tomorrow? Any last pieces of advice?
Yeah. I think in general, a lot of what we've talked about today, systems are important. You know, I think being organized, whatever that looks like for you, is important. There's so much on our plate as independent artists. There's so much that we have to do. And so having some kind of system is really necessary. So I think as a final takeaway, whatever it is that you're doing, make sure you have something. But I think the other really important piece of this is, you know, be flexible in that. Don't beat yourself up if you set this schedule and you do all these things and then you go to do the work and you're just not feeling it. Like, that's normal. Like, don't beat yourself up. Instead, put that down, you know, accept that you're feeling that way, and look at other things that you can put your time and energy into, because again, you know, there's plenty for us to do. There's no shortage of work. So yeah, I think just final takeaways is like, be organized, have your structure, but don't be afraid to be flexible. Don't be afraid to take breaks. Breaks can still be creative. You know, you can still be creative in that space where you're not sitting at your instrument. So I think that's a really big thing I've learned in the last, you know, couple years, and that I'd really love for listeners to take away from this is that, you know? Yeah,
well said, man. I think it's really important to let yourself be vulnerable to the creative process. This was a really vulnerable episode, like kind of opening up about our own creative processes and the struggles that we deal with. So thanks so much for jumping on, man, and being a part of this and allowing Ed and I to be a bit more emotional and maybe less tactical than we typically are on the show.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me. I love talking about this stuff with you guys. It's great.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I hope you guys take some of these ideas and some of these strategies and maybe just some of these tips and start applying them in your day-to-day life. and hopefully see yourself have a surge in creativity and a helpful bump up in productivity as well as you work on your art. And until next time, we'll see you guys later on Creative Juice. Peace out.
Can y'all really feel the East Coast?